All right, I want to welcome everybody to episode 2 of Gavin's Great Idea. Today, I've got Brad Ascalon, world-renowned industrial designer. Brad, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you being here with us.
My
I want to
pleasure.
do a couple quick shout-outs to our clients and our friends. As you all know, I'm principal and founder of Wingate Hughes Architects here, and we're getting to work and do some great things with our friends over at Interface Media Group. Jeff and Aaron, I know you guys are going to be listening today or when this episode is recorded. And I just want to say I appreciate your support of the podcast and of the design. You guys have been amazing to work with. Brad, we're going to talk about something very complicated today, right? We're going to talk about simplicity.
Yes,
and I think we talked a little bit about it the other day, and you and I've had a whole bunch of conversations. Tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are first so we can kick this off. I do care about who you are because it's such a unique field that you're in. The idea of an industrial designer. Some people think you just design toothbrushes. Some people think you just design warehouses. What is it you actually do all day?
So, industrial design has so many directions and there's so many pockets. Basically the whole industry is how are we designing for industrial processes? Really, that's what the industrial aspect of it means. So, any products that we use, any products that we purchase, whether it's commercial, consumer, anything from furniture to decorative objects to technology and the pen I'm holding, it encompasses so much, and very few people still have a grasp of what designers are and what they do, and they assume that we make things look pretty, right? But that's kind of, and for some people they do it, and that's what they do, and they do it well. But I started my studio in 2006 with this premise that the beauty of an object should come following this very rigorous kind of process of understanding where the needs are, where the opportunities lie, what the client and the manufacturer, the brands I work with, what their goals are, and then within that
they're your patrons, right?
Sure, absolutely. And you have like these limitations, right? You've got like materials can only do certain things, right? So at the end of the day, you feed your idea into all of this puzzle, and what comes out of it at the end has to look great, has to be desirable. But that's not what we do. We're not stylists,
right? Well, and I think it's interesting to know you and I grew up in and were formally trained in postmodernism. That was what was all around us. And this idea in the 90s that, forget all the rules, nothing matters. Do whatever you want, be yourself, be independent. That rolled into design. And I think what we were left with in the early 2000s was design that just wanted to be for itself with little understanding of the history or any respect for the history and why things happened and what was going on. And it was more about the style than understanding where it came from. And I think you have an interesting take on that, even with your first table that you designed, right? With its involvement in Baroque, right?
Right. So when I started my studio, there was, I'm all for contextual design, right? I'm all for referencing historical moments and whatnot. And so there are periods where the context is lost. I think if you look at the Memphis movement, and for those of you guys who don't understand or know what Memphis is, look it up, research it. It was this amazing period of, it was a revolt against beauty. It was a revolt against design for design's sake, for the prettiness of objects. It was experimental. It was, and now you see so many people referencing that movement without the context, because it's not a reaction against anything. It's simply style, and that's something I have a huge problem with. But, back to that table in 2008, we launched our first collaboration with Lin Rosé, the French company. And I designed a table called Spindle, and it was this really beautiful Baroque element framed in this minimal piece of glass. At the time, a lot of designers were referencing that ornamentation and that beauty of Victorian era and the Baroque era, but they were doing it kind of like as a wink, like, haha, get it? As a one-liner. Yeah. And I got tired of that really quick. And so this table that I did was it was a means to end the conversation, because I wanted to respect both that ornamentation and the modernism and the minimalism that we kind of experience today.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about simplicity in design and what you do. For me, I'm doing the best design I've ever done in my life, and it's not an accident. And I'm going to continue getting better at what I do. I believe that's the case because I'm learning more about all of the other parts of my industry that aren't the pretty parts. Right. I've got a great team that I'm learning from, a great business partner that I'm learning from. And so when I was coming up, I studied code. I remember my first job was working in a job trailer building a $64 million building, and they handed me a stack of 200 requests for information, and I was supposed to put those into 3 huge sets of plans so the field people come out and see where they went. I had no idea what I was doing, but I had to learn every single part about my industry, what all the different icons meant, what the different symbols meant, how the drawings go together, how the damn thing's built, what the code says, what the materials say. And it's only with that understanding for me that I'm able to design that thing that people say, oh, of course it's that. That was so easy.
Right.
But it's not, is it?
No, it's not at all. I mean, so I always reference, Mark Twain was famous amongst other things.
Yeah, he was famous. You're right. Sorry.
For this. No, you're not wrong. For this line he wrote, as folklore goes, he wrote a letter to one of his friends. I don't know the subject of the letter, but it was this long and drawn out letter. And at the end, he says, "I apologize for such a long letter. If I had more time, it would have been a lot shorter."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of my whole entire take on design and simplicity. And, and when we started talking about this topic, it's the complexity of simplicity that's interesting. It is so hard to do something so simple.
Right.
And people don't see that. People don't realize that for the most part. They could sense it kind of intrinsically or whatnot, but it's not something that they realize offhand. And to your point, understanding all of that context, going way back to you learning codes before you were, designing buildings. We have to know everything that came before us. We have to know manufacturing processes. We have to know what failed and what succeeded and why, before we can kind of branch out into any direction. Right. Composers who are avant-garde, they wouldn't be who they are if they didn't understand what came before them, and design's the same way. Minimalism was a reaction against heavy spending and the 80s with loud, bright, bold everything. And it was like, whoa, we need to cool it. Yeah. Right. We need, let's take a breath. That was minimalism, and that was a movement, and what I consider what I do to be reductivism. Right. And reductivism is not a movement. It's an approach.
And it's more than just a sauce.
I think.
A little wine reduction.
Yeah, no, I got you.
yeah, right. Okay. But what is reductivism? How do you know when you're there?
Yeah, it's this idea that anything that's not necessary for the sake of the manufacturing of or the function of a product, we eliminate. We don't add ornamentation for the sake of ornamentation, right? Why? Because that adds complexity, that adds cost, that adds just things that are unnecessary in the design process. There's artistic license. We have poetic license to not be so strict and standard. But when push comes to shove, I think that people psychologically respond to purity of design. There's something warm and inviting about the lack of complexity. And that's, we can have a whole conversation about why. It's a safe zone. We live in a world that's very complicated and very hard to deal with most of the time. We want something that counters that, and if you look at office furniture and office spaces and interior design there and hotels and residents, they're all following this suit with soft, pure form, colors, materials, textures, because we need that as human beings.
Right. And do you think that movement of referencing the 50s and the modernist design and the mid-century modern, do you think we reference that just because that's what we have the most pictures of? instead of really talking about the feel, you know what I mean? And saying, oh, no, it's safe because we've done it before and it relates to this.
I think we reference that because it was done right at the right time. You know, we're talking about post-war industrialized America, right? Yeah. So we needed, we had designers who were taking advantage of those processes, right? Whether it was the eames and plywood shells, or whether it was, whatever it was, they were creating this language that was given to them by the needs, I think, of society. And, they had their patrons who were willing to explore this with them, manufacturers like Herman Miller and Knoll. And they were using those industrial processes to the best ability that they could. They weren't just designing pretty chairs.
Right.
They were responding to something.
Yeah. And I think
that's why it's still relevant today.
That's why it's still relevant. It's not just because we see cool pictures and we like it, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. When you're approaching design in your career, we go through a struggle. We all have done it as designers. Are you designing a piece that you know can make money? Are you designing a piece that you know is right? Are you designing a piece that's beautiful? Because we've all faced that decision of I could design this thing and make a ton of money and people love it, but it would have no soul. It would be vapid, right? Tell me how you've dealt with that internal debate for yourself, because I know you have.
Yeah, I have. And in the beginning of my career, I took on projects that I otherwise wouldn't have, because I had to pay my bills. I had to keep my shop open. Very quickly, I'd say a couple of years into it, I learned about the type of designer I wanted to be. Yeah. And that did not include, I never wanted to equate success with a bank account, right? Okay. Those two were completely separate things. And I knew that if I stood my ground and designed the types of projects for the types of companies that I wanted to work with, then the rest would follow. It's really hard to design for, one of the great companies in the world, Carl Hansen or something. If the year before I was designing for Walmart, it doesn't make sense, and nor should it. So early on, I said, okay, we're not going to design for the sake of the almighty dollar. We're going to design what we believe our clients need. Yeah. What we believe, yes, we'll do well in the market, which leads to, more income, of course, but it's not how I got my clients. I got my clients by being true to the notion of craft and quality and understanding the business implications of every decision we make.
Yeah. No, I think that's important. And I've read a lot of business books and startup books, and they all talk about the same idea. Find the clients that you best align with.
Yeah.
But what I think they miss is something you said right at the beginning. When you're starting, when you're growing, when you're building, you do what it takes to get the job and to be able to be there so you can then pick the clients. You can't always start the company and say, okay, I'm just getting into this industry, and so I'm only going to work for certain people. Well, if nobody knows who you are, why would they hire you? And I think that the way you've built your brand, bradascalon.com for anybody who's looking, is really amazing. And it's a testament to you can do it that way.
Right.
You can do it that way. How did you learn all this stuff? Was it just school? You just went to school and you came out and you're like, perfect, I'm an industrial designer. I can do all the amazing things.
I had a life before industrial design. I went to undergrad at Rutgers in New Jersey. I got out of school. I went into advertising. From there, I got into the music industry. And I learned after 4 or 5 years who I didn't want to be in the professional world. I learned that I didn't want to work for anybody.
Yeah.
I learned that, when I got into design, it was going to be sink or swim. I have to learn this on my own. School doesn't teach you, how to be a professional designer. They teach you your toolbox.
There you go. Yeah.
But I went out, my first client was actually one of the major cosmetics brands. They reached out to me. They saw some work of mine online, and I spent about 1.5 years designing for them. And it was a pretty lucrative industry at the time for a designer. But after 1.5 years, I realized how soulless it was. I was trying to convince them that we should start looking at sustainable materials, right? Eco-friendly materials at the time when Avita was already using them and other brands were already using them.
Mm-hmm.
And the feedback I got was, if we spend 1 more cent on our primary packaging, then we wouldn't sell.
Right.
And it's just like, all right, you're going to be dinosaurs. Mm-hmm. And so right there, that was a lesson. Like, if I don't have that visceral feeling when I start talking to a company,
right,
when we start talking about a project, maybe it's not the right project.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't need to do it.
Well, and I think it's important to trust yourself.
Yeah.
And to trust what you know about an industry. I remember when I was young in the industry, I had all kinds of wonderful ideas that everybody should do what I'm thinking. Looking back on it, I wasn't wrong, but I didn't always have the depth to understand all the other implications around that decision.
Absolutely.
So I spent time learning about all of those and what the decision would really mean or when to make it.
You bring up an interesting point though, because as a young designer, I mean, we are very sensitive people, right? Creative people are sensitive, and
yes.
we take everything personally. So in the beginning of my career, a company would say no, or they wouldn't even get back to me. And I took that as such a, like, it hurt me at the core.
Worst. Yeah. Yeah.
And it probably took a good 5-6 years before I realized that the no that I hear may have nothing to do with me and my concepts, my ideas. It's just the wrong product for the wrong time. There are a million different things going on with a major manufacturing company, internally, and simply it wasn't right at the time.
Right. Yeah.
And now maybe it is. One of the projects we just launched with a company called Hightower, we started talking about that concept. It's called Ziggy. We started talking about that concept in 2006, I believe.
Right on.
And we just launched it. Not 2006, 2016. And we just launched it 4 years later, because it wasn't right at the time.
Right. But you had to wait.
Yeah.
Designed for simplicity, designing things with a simplistic mindset. As I think we've discussed it requires knowing so many things about the decision, about the product, about the process. I really feel like, and I love your take on this. Like, when people tell me, clients tell you this all the time, well, I'm not a designer, and while your clients might not, your end users, well, I'm not a designer, but I know what I like, or, well, I'm not really going to understand this because I'm not a designer. I really think that design in some ways is an inherent thing that some people have, some people don't, to varying degrees. But the manner of thinking about a design is something everybody has. And I really think everybody applies in their daily life, whether they know it or not. Right? When you arrange things on your dresser in a certain way, just so you like them, that's design, right? You were talking about this yesterday, and I really like the way you said it.
Yeah, I mean, how many people do we know? It's like, I know nothing about design, but I respect what you do. Of course you do, right?
Yeah.
You put your console table by the front door. That's design. That's there because you throw your keys in your wallet, and when you get home, like, design is not this like crazy unknown thing, right? It's pretty simple to understand. There's a problem that we have to solve for.
Right.
Cavemen were problem solving. They were designing.
I think my wife would have something to say about this too. Her and I've talked about the idea of design. I believe, and I want to know what you think, that in school, we should teach drawing at the same level we teach writing. We teach kids how to write. We teach kids how to write, how to do letters, how to write sentences.
Right.
We spend tons of time teaching them.
Of course.
But we spend no time almost, except for an art class, teaching them how to use their hand and a pen, or their hand and a tablet, to express something that's in their brain.
Right. And it goes both ways. I use math every day of my life. I use geometry and I use algebra when I'm designing a table.
Yep.
So, you can't tell me that it doesn't work the other way around. An accountant can't kind of use that creative energy to solve something that he never solved before. She never solved before.
Right.
It's a back and forth. And I think the balance in education is terrible, but it has a lot to be desired, of course.
When you're thinking about a product, when you're thinking about a song, because I know you still write songs, how do you know when it's done?
You just do.
Yeah.
You just
That's
do.
it?
It's
How do you know it's ready to share with somebody? Like I have an idea. I've been working on it for a while. How do you know when that idea is ready to share? Because it's not, I wouldn't think, when the PowerPoint's done.
of course,
Yeah.
no.
How do you know when it's ready to share with somebody, though, for real?
So I think the art in general,
Mhm.
painting, photography, design, cooking, right?
Yeah.
We're all doing the same thing, right? We're taking ingredients and we're mixing them together in a specific way to reach an outcome that we want for ourselves, right?
Mhm.
When we, a chef knows when his dish is done. The difference with design, though, as opposed to art and photography and all of those things, design has to run through the filter of the client, the manufacturer, right?
Okay.
And this is what I think is the most powerful thing about design. It's that it's not about me. It's not about my recipe, right?
Okay.
It's about an idea that will spark ideas in you, and then you'll come back to me. It's a back and forth. Design is a dance between the client and the designer to find the right solution. It's not about my ideas and your ideas. It's about the right ideas.
Right.
And so that process is what excites me, because that process humanizes. It builds relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have friends around the world because I've designed with companies around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's brutal. Sometimes it's arguing and it's fighting to get, the right output. But in the end, it's always worth it, because you're delivering the best possible design that all of our expertise kind of are pulled together to create.
Mm-hmm. For me, and I love that answer, because it absolutely is about that collaboration in what you're doing. For me, there's two things to overcome in order for me to know like a design's ready. The first one is fear, and that fear of rejection, and fear that, wow, is it good enough? Is it me? And I have a healthy dose of this fear literally every time I get a commission. Do I have another design in me? Do I have another one to pull out? Because you don't know, but time tells you, yeah, I do, and I've done this enough. So I think that fear is something that inhibits people from figuring out when they're going to design, if a design's ready. And it's a very liberating thing to break through, to put that aside, and to kind of, take that step off the cliff. The other part for me, knowing when it's ready, is when I can explain it. When either the picture speaks for itself, so somebody's going to understand where I'm coming from, or it's developed enough that I could explain it to my mother and she would get it. To somebody that's not a part of the field, somebody that's not part of the project, when they could look at it and say, yeah, oh yeah, I get that. Doesn't mean they have to like it.
Right. And it doesn't mean they're right.
Yeah. But at least so they understand what I'm coming up with. Because so often in design, look, I could be inspired by Louis Vuitton's perfume bottles he did in the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
That was very inspiring to me. But nobody really gives a shit about that.
Right.
So you can't walk into a class and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. So I know what we're doing is running 100,000 feet perfume bottles. Right. That's your inspiration. Bullshit.
No.
So I can't.
I get this all the time. I get this question, what's your inspiration for this? And it's just like, they want me to like tell them that, I saw a leaf floating, falling from a tree.
Nature.
I'm like, no,
nature.
My inspiration is like, there's a freaking need out there. That's the inspiration. How do we solve that? And, to your point on fear, when a client comes in with a new brief and I stare at it like a deer in headlights,
right?
That's when I know it's going to be a great product.
Yeah.
Right. It's going to be a great journey at the very least.
Yeah.
When I already know what it, they tell me, here's what we're looking for. I can picture it already. I'm not scared at all. It'll be fine. It'll be nice. It'll maybe do well, maybe not. But like that fear is the driver,
Mm-hmm.
And another thing you suggested that made me think, it's very hard to bounce ideas off of anybody as an independent designer, right? I have, my wife is a great judge of my design, and she actually helps me design in a lot of cases. She has this intuitive that is unexplainable, but very few people come at it from the way I come at it. I noticed like one of your audience members, Jacob Nitz, who's a super talented designer in London. He works with me on a lot of occasions, and he's one of those voices where I'm just like, dude, is this even good? Like, I'm so in this vacuum of myself. But there's very few people who, in most designers kind of circles, that are willing to tell you that thing you need to be told before you end up bringing it to the client.
Right.
And saying, this is the answer.
Yeah.
Right.
Because at your, like Brad Ascalon designing at 50% capacity or ability, most people would be like, wow, Brad, I mean, you nailed it, buddy. You nailed it. Right. And so it is hard to get that next group of people that's like, yeah, it's good.
Right.
That little, but could you do? Right. And I think that's where you've picked your partnerships right and your clients right, because they're pushing you too, and you already know their standard. Yeah. So that's what you know how to reach for. But it can be a very lonely thing.
Yeah, for sure.
To do.
And good, good is the opposite of great, right? It's the enemy of great. And I don't want to create good products, right? I want to create great products. And to that point, you can only create great products if the companies you're working with are great, because they're the only ones who won't stop at 95%. They won't stop at 96%. They're going to take it to that 100% level, right? And they refuse to do anything but. Whether that's from a sustainability standpoint, from a functional standpoint, quality, it means the world. We have enough products. We have enough stuff in the world. If we're not doing it with an emphasis on greatness, then we shouldn't be doing it anymore. We've learned by now,
Tell me,
how does this relate to simplicity?
Well, it does, because maybe it doesn't, but I think about maximalism.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, if I had to explain, maximalism is just, in my mind, just throw a whole bunch of shit in a room that doesn't match. And then you've got it. I don't know how I could, without laughing, explain that concept to a client and be serious about it.
Right.
That's where I'm coming from. If I can't tell a client it only needs this and no more, then I can't believe in that design. For us, the comparison is if you walk into a space that I've designed, you won't find anything that you can remove that doesn't make a difference to the space.
Sure. And it's the same way with design. I mean, with how I design my approach,
anything extra that shouldn't be there shouldn't have been there. If no one notices that it disappeared, then it never should have been there.
Right. It's as much as it needs to be, as little as it can be. Right.
Yeah.
And that's something I try to practice with every product. Does this need, you question, you edit, you reduce to, does this need to be here?
Yeah. Let's talk about how you apply this. So we've got the final product and we design, and it's simple, and that's beautiful. I've been really into process lately.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we're working on here at Wingate Hughes is how to further our rigorous process of design. But it's not just design, because when you have a project, you're also meeting with clients, you're scheduling things, you're looking at suppliers. So you're doing all of the things that support the design, right? I want to have a furthering almost of a militant attitude of, here's the linear thinking. Here's the things we know we have to do in a certain order. And we know how to do those and execute those. Because at the end of the day, that could be 85% of the project.
Yeah.
And if you can do those, in my mind, and have that simple, straightforward process, then all of the other stuff that comes around it, that's in 2-4 dimensions around the timeline of a project, that's when the exciting, beautiful stuff can happen.
Right.
Tell me about your process, and I imagine you have to have some type of simplicity and not just a whole bunch of random chaos. I design when I feel like it kind of moments, right?
I mean, the process is so different from client to client and from need to need. But generally speaking, I'm not going to put pen to paper until I fully understand who I'm working with, who their market is, and where the opportunities are. I'm constantly auditing the market. I'm constantly auditing their product lines, and I'm finding opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And usually it's kind of more in the problem solving realm than it is the aesthetic realm, as we talked about before.
Yeah.
And that then becomes a conversation, right? It's all about conversations, all about listening to your clients, understanding their needs, and translating it. At the end of the day, it has to be part of their DNA. Most of these companies, they've prided themselves over the course of years, decades, century plus to be the brand they are. There is a DNA that they have. So who am I to come in and disrupt that, right? I can tie my DNA as a designer, my aesthetics, my philosophies, my approach to theirs. And that middle ground is, this is why, great brands have such a vast array of great pieces, because every designer has a different DNA and they're all combining with the manufacturer's DNA, right? It's just a different output every time.
Yeah.
So, you try to solve this project, from this problem from a very linear standpoint, like you said. Here are the things it needs to be. Here are the processes we can engage in.
Yeah.
And now it's like, okay, we've put ourselves in this box. We know where we and now how do we design out of that box?
Yeah.
And that's exploration. That's like, I'm designing some glassware right now for one of my clients, nude glass out of Turkey. And I'm designing 100 different things. I'm concepting 100 different things to show them one idea, right? Because if I'm not rigorous about it, if I'm not doing my due diligence and looking at every possible opportunity, then I'm not doing my job. It's very easy for a designer to say, here's the napkin sketch, right? Go make it.
Yeah.
I don't like that approach,
Yeah.
So
how to make it.
Yeah. It's all about rigor and understanding materials and processes and price points. And, is it to the retail market? Is it to the commercial market?
So in this process, then our knowledge removes our barriers to design.
Yes.
Right.
But we also kind of, there's a side of me and you kind of want to be a professional novice in a way. You want to know, you don't want to know too much where you can't shake things up. Right.
I think of myself as a generalist in a lot of ways.
Right. One of my professors when I went to grad school at Pratt, a gentleman named Bruce Hanna, one of the first things I remember him telling me is, if you're John Deere and you want to revolutionize the lawnmower, are you going to ask somebody who's designed 100 lawnmowers or somebody who's never done it? And I take that with me every day. So you want to know enough, but not too much, where you can't throw a wrench in the equation, right? You have to know these things to break these things.
Yep. So quick preview for my next podcast. My good friend, James Halliburton, from Texas A&M. He's a professor there and owns an architecture firm down in Texas, and is brilliant in his own right. I was going to build a treehouse for my kids. I knew I didn't want, for me, a treehouse is in a tree, not touching the ground. And so I started building it. Because my wife goes crazy because I didn't have plans, but I knew what I wanted to do. And as I'm starting the process, I call James because I know enough about structural engineering and loads and moments, but not everything. So I'm calling James and he's like, "You're already building this, aren't you?" I'm like, yeah, I'm already building it. He's like, "Send me a sketch of what it looks like and I'll run a quick structural calculation on it to make sure this thing isn't going to A, kill the tree, and B, fall down."
Yeah. Think about the kids.
So I totally get that, where we've got to know enough to know when to call somebody, when to get help. But if I didn't understand basic structural engineering properties, I wouldn't have known to call him, and I wouldn't have known to do some of the things that I already did. Do I know it perfectly? No, but I think that you make a great point. It's know enough to be dangerous, but don't let yourself catch on fire.
And, and with that said, there are, I'm a believer in the traditional materials, right? I'm a believer in wood and metal and glass and upholstery and all of that. When it goes to the new materials, I'm not so interested as I am with the more traditional ones. But, material exploration. So it is a fascinating thing, even with these materials we've known. So, like wood, right? I design in wood every single day. And not until maybe 8 years ago or so, a gentleman named Jörg Forster out of Germany developed a three-dimensional veneer, right? So if you're familiar with any veneer plywood chair, it bends in one direction, right? And it's IKEA furniture. It's the cheap plywood furniture that you see everywhere. And he had this idea to cut micro scores in the opposite direction of the way it bends, right? And he was experimenting with this. And all of a sudden, now you could bend in 2 dimensions. Now you can create concavities and convexity, 3 dimensions, concavities and convexities that wood never offered, right? And this is not, this is a material that
isn't plastic. That's
exactly. It's not plastic. It's not fiberglass, And with that technology, all of a sudden, we opened up to a completely new way of thinking about what we're designing, right? So we did this collection for Carl Hansen a couple of years ago, the Preludia series, and the chairs are all made of 3-dimensional veneer. Which I
remember you telling me about that. Yeah.
Because it's so structured, because it's so, you can get such concavity out of it. That the more concave it is, the stronger it is, right?
Right.
So you've got a 6mm shell wood chair that is more comfortable than any plastic, any fiberglass chair you could have, right? But it was his initial, here's what we know, right, about veneer. And he was a master in veneer before this. And then he said, how do we throw a wrench in it?
That's cool.
And he completely changed the technology.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Brad, this has been a great conversation. I think we're at our time. I was going to ask you if you had any cool material things to share with anybody, and then there you go. You just did.
There we go.
Last time we got together was some amazing sushi.
Yes.
Up in your neighborhood there in New York. I definitely see a parallel in you and your approach to design and your love of amazing sushi. It's finding those right ingredients, finding the expert to put them together in the right way to taste delicious. And I'll also tell you, if there's anybody out there that has not experienced an omakase menu, it is the most beautiful thing. It's when the chef brings you what the chef wants you to eat. And there is something about letting go and letting someone else do that for you. That's design. And that's really what it means to be a patron, and what it means to design for yourself too. I've got one ask for you.
Yes.
I'm not going to make you pull out the guitar right now. But we will need intro music and outro music for this podcast when I put it live. So maybe you put something together for us.
Between me and my brother, who's a music producer, I think we can accomplish that.
I think that'd be great. That'd be great. Brad, I really enjoyed talking with you.
Absolutely,
thank you everybody who tuned in to episode 2 of Gavin's Great Idea. I've had Brad Ascalon. We've had an amazing conversation. I hope everybody listens to this again when we post it on YouTube. Thank you to all our listeners and fans and supporters out there. Brad, thank you again.
Thank you, Gavin. Thanks, everybody.
I love your brilliant mind, and I look forward to seeing you in person again soon, brother. Take care.
All right, man. Hopefully soon. Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye, everybody.
That's the take.